Welcome to Attainable Green. I'm Jess, and today we're going to be talking about how to prepare orchids for the winter season. Now here in Southern California, we have fairly mild winters. It doesn't snow, and we don't have super heavy rainfall, but we definitely have certain conditions that can be detrimental to orchids. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I do to make sure that my orchids survive through the winter season. So first, I grow a portion of my plants indoors and a portion of my plants outdoors. For the outdoor space, I am putting in a second grow tent because I want to make sure that I can protect my plants when the rains come. While most plants do love rain and they enjoy the moisture, the downfall is that with the cooler temperatures, the plants don't have time to dry out, and cool and wet is a recipe for rot. So by putting a protective cover over my grow tent, I just make sure that I can control the amount of moisture that the plants are receiving during the winter time. So after assembling the grow tent indoors, I'm moving it outside to the actual space where it will stay for the duration of the winter season. Currently, the weather is still pretty warm, so I don't have a need to put the plastic covering over it. I just have to clear up some space so that I can put my plants there and have them adapt to that area before the cooler weather hits. Depending on where you live and the kind of plants you have, you may have to do more than what I have to do to prepare your orchids for the winter, especially if you're growing them outside. I know some people have to put in heaters, some fans, just so you can make sure you have the right environment for your orchids to grow. Last year, I kept this same setup, and I did fine without a heater and without a humidifier or a fan, and things were just fine. If I needed some additional air movement, I just open up and unzip the openings, and that should be sufficient. Also, I noticed that in this tent, it can retain a decent amount of humidity, and the temperature doesn't dip below 45 degrees. So second of all, I want to make sure that I have the right plants in the right location. So I'm putting a lot of my cooler growers, like my Miltoniopsis and my Dendrobium nobile, outside so that they can experience cooler weather that benefits their growth and their growth cycle. As I'm migrating some of my plants outdoors, I'm also putting some indoors. So they're doing a big swap. So some of my warmer growers, like my Vandas, are going back inside, and also some of my plants that are going dormant, like my Catasetums, will also be transferred indoors so that there's more space for my plants and they're not all going to be crowded in one area. Around this time is where I do a kind of inventory of my plants just to make sure that I'm giving them the right environment. If a plant needs its winter rest and a cool down period or something similar, then they go outside. If they can't handle lower temperatures and they're used to being in more stable conditions or in more tropical conditions, then those plants are transferred indoors. And the third thing I do to prepare my plants for the winter season is that once all the plants are in their desired location, I just make sure that I'm optimizing my environment for my plants. So with my indoor orchids, there are a few species that really like to stay warm throughout the year. They don't like temperatures below about 65 or so, and so I definitely have to make sure that those ones are in the warmest spot in the house. This primarily applies to species like my Path Lycochilum and some of my summer blooming phals. They really like those very warm conditions so that they don't slow down their growth, and basically they don't want them to shut down. Also, I have my seedlings and recently deflasked plants indoors. And to make sure that they survive and grow well throughout the cooler season, I have them set up on a seedling heat mat. And also, I installed a grow light so they can have optimal growing conditions. Depending on the conditions of your own home and your environment, you may have to add things also like a humidifier, a heater, or a fan as well to make sure that your plants are doing well and that they continue to be healthy. In my current space, I don't have to worry about that. Some of the plants definitely are on a seedling heat mat, but they don't need a heater specifically, and they also don't need a humidifier. So in the wintertime, we tend to have higher humidity, and we don't really turn on the central air or central heating, so we don't have that issue of our plants drying out. So those are the main things that I consider to make sure that my plants do well during the winter season. But here are a couple bonus tips. The first is dealing with fertilizing and watering your plants. As the temperatures are cooling down, the plants don't need as much water, and if some are going through a rest or a dormancy, then they definitely don't need fertilizer. I only add fertilizer to plants that are going to go and grow throughout the year. So phals will need fertilizer throughout the year. Evergreen dendrobiums will also need fertilizer. If the plant is actively growing, then please continue adding fertilizer. But if the plant is slowing down and taking a bit of a rest, then I decrease or back off fertilizer altogether. Sometimes I just want to keep it really simple, so I just stop fertilizing during the winter season, and then when spring picks up and there's a lot more new growth, then I can resume fertilizing. So second is watering. So in the wintertime, you don't have to water your plants as much as you used to during the summer season because the plants are slowing down, they're not absorbing as many nutrients, and so you don't want the plants to stay wet for too long. Being cold and wet is really detrimental to most orchids. They really like a dried period as the temperature decreases. I tend to water a little too much during the winter time, and that's when I encounter the most problems with my orchids. Sometimes they may get some fungal spotting, bacterial infections, rot, and also mold growth. And that is primarily because those things thrive in really wet, really cold conditions. Not only that, is that there are pests that may come in when you're transferring your orchids all around. So make sure you have clean plants and make sure that everything looks good before you settle in for the winter season. Also, when you're watering your plants, just make sure you use warm or room temperature water because you don't want to shock the plants. Most of the time, they'll do fine if the water is still a little bit cold, but if it's like just right below freezing, it's not going to do well. So that's kind of my overview on how I take care of my plants during the winter season and how to keep them healthy. And if you have any suggestions or you do something completely different, please let me know in the comments and we can all share our experiences depending on our environment and our cultural conditions, and also the type of orchids that we have. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel Attainable Green to follow along on my orchid growing journey. I hope you all are doing well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!